Resident Evil 4.
I think I'm gonna do videos from like this from now on, just super casually. Like, you're gonna go to bed thinking, man, what a casual guy. I quite like it this way around. It feels slightly less formal, like less like I'm at school. Hello, I'm here to present my presentation. So I kind of like this. We can pretend like we're just having a little chat across like a coffee table or something. Okay, Resident Evil 9 is out. It's out now. I played it. I played the whole thing. I completed it. Not a particularly long game. The end screen said it took me 12 hours, but I don't think that's true, because it felt closer to like 20 hours. About average for a Resident Evil game, I suppose. I want to just get down right to business. Right down to business. I don't want to be here for ages just rambling on about lots of different things, so I want to just be very direct, I want to be very blunt, and I want to get through this nice and quickly. This game has been getting really good reviews and getting a lot of good reactions from people, which is good. I do enjoy this game. That is what I'm going to say right out the bat. I did enjoy my time with this game, and it was a damn sight better than Resident Evil 8. That being said though, I almost feel more inclined to criticize it more because of how much praise it's getting, possibly just due to my natural contrarianism, but also I feel like that's a good thing because the game is being praised and being talked up a lot and has a crazy high Metacritic score. Not that that matters, by the way. So I feel like maybe evening out the playing field just a tad, you know, like I should be giving the game some criticism because it has garnered so much positivity, because that only seems fair, because there are things that the game doesn't do very well and there are problems with it in a more kind of philosophical, general sense. So let's start with the positives then. The game's dueling protagonists work really well together, I think, both gameplay-wise and story-wise. I've never liked Leon Kennedy this much in a game before, but I really enjoyed him in this one. I think it's because he works as a contrast to Grace, who is probably one of my favourite Resident Evil characters, if not my favourite, like, mainline protagonist, because she is just a normal person, but she's also very smart. There's a few good moments where she uses her brain and she does some smart on-the-spot thinking. She's not an idiot, but she is also incredibly anxious and an incredibly nervous person, and seeing her kind of transform throughout the game and become more of a confident person, although not a complete, like, unflappable badass like a lot of the Resident Evil protagonists. I really liked Grace for all of her little quirks and her character moments, and the fact that she felt like a very relatable person. But I also like Leon quite a bit as well in this game, and I think it's because he contrasts well with Grace. When he's the main protagonist, he's not particularly relatable because he is quite comedic. He's quite a comical character. He's like a straight off a comic book page. So when he's contrasted with someone who is actually like a more relatable character, then it makes me enjoy him more, because I'm not having to rely on him for the kind of more human attachment. You know, he's almost like a comedic sidekick or something. So I liked both the main characters, and I thought they were handled well. And I also liked the dueling stories. I thought that the gameplay contrast worked better than it had any right to. You have the survival horror first-person-y stuff with Grace. You can play it in first or third person, but the game suggests, and by default is set to first person with Grace while you're doing the survival horror stuff, and then third person for Leon when you switch to like his more action-oriented sections. I like this setup. I think this is a good setup. I think it works very well for the game, and it's surprisingly not nearly as jarring as you would think, kind of switching back and forth between the first-person horror and the third-person action. On like a gameplay technical level, I think this is the culmination of Resident Evil and everything that it's learnt over the last however many years. It does feel like they have really perfected both the survival horror, slower paced stuff and the action stuff. They've been doing this shit for 30 years now, so you'd expect them to be good at it. There are a couple of little technical niggles that I had with it. There's a very funny visual glitch where Leon's gun straps like freak out and they stop having physics, so they just like point up. There's a really annoying bug actually where later in the game I decided to get deliberately killed by some plant monsters that were taking my health, and I just thought, okay, I'll just do the section over again because I've really messed up here. So then I went back to the last autosave, and I couldn't progress because Leon had to interact with like a rope to abseil down a cliff, and he just wouldn't. There was no prompt for the rope. So I was getting really worried then for a second because I thought I would have to reload from a previous manual save, which would have put me back before a boss because I didn't save after the boss, stupidly. Luckily though, the game does autosave, so I was able to just go back a couple of autosaves because there's like 2 autosaves. You expect these little bugs and stuff, especially when you're playing the game, you know, on day 1, so it's not a massive problem. There was a bit of visual stuttering throughout the game. I did notice I was playing on the PS5 Pro as well. I think that's important to mention. There was a lot of like visual stuttering during cutscenes. It was basically every cutscene there was like jittering, you know, the characters wouldn't animate smoothly. I don't know exactly why that is or like what is causing that problem. Occasionally it would happen during gameplay, but very slightly. Overall the performance was very good. I'm still not sold on ray tracing. Ray tracing can sometimes look really good, but I'm playing it on the PS5 Pro, and I don't know, there were a lot of like visual glitches and typical kind of ray tracing like blurriness that would occur on certain objects, ghosting, you know, that I would describe it as, which you're probably familiar with if you played a game with ray tracing on. Ultimately, I think unless you have like the ultimate like highest end PC hardware, ray tracing is just never going to quite work, which is a shame, but for the most part, you know, it looked pretty good, and when it was used and it wasn't kind of glitching out, it looked nice. So this is one of those things, hit and miss, I would say, but generally visually the game looks really good. So overall, I just want to say I really liked the game. I enjoyed my time with it. However, I am going to get onto my biggest criticisms, because I do have some. So obviously the story is completely whack. It's a Resident Evil game. So, you know, complaining about the story, I think, is just unnecessary at this point. If you have a particular connection with the canon of Resident Evil and you find the constant retcons to be annoying, I don't blame you, and I'm sure that, you know, someone who is more well-versed in a lot of this stuff can probably do a breakdown and explain why Resident Evil 9's plot is really stupid and dumb and doesn't make any sense. But for me, you know, the plot is just an excuse for things to happen and for fun gameplay, so I don't really care that much. Putting aside plot though, I do want to mention that I found the villains to be very underwhelming in this game. They don't have a presence outside of cutscenes, really, except for like one section on the motorbike with Leon where, I mean, that's basically a glorified like on rails turret section anyway. And then obviously the final boss, which, you know, not to mince words, was a big pile of shitty crap. I was convinced that the main villain was gonna turn into like a giant snake or something, because he's wearing like a snakeskin jacket and he has snake rings on his hand. And then he doesn't. He just turns into a generic end boss, Resident Evil end boss, with the obvious weak points that you gotta shoot. And it's incredibly boring, and you just step from side to side because he can't hit you. Or even just tank the hits, because at that point in the game, you're at the end, so it doesn't really matter. And you've probably got a load of health items anyway, because I don't know about you, but by the end of the game I had so much ammo and so much health, it was crazy. Is it just typical of Resident Evil games that the beginning is always way better, because once you kind of learn how to play the game, and once you start getting more resources and more capable firepower, you end up just hoarding ammo and hoarding health, and then the game will throw you lots of higher level items near the end of the game, which you might not even really need. I barely used like the main pistol, like the Requiem, like big fuck off gun. There were crafting elements that I didn't even use the entire time in the game. Like, I didn't craft any special bullets or any special items. I just kept to, like, the handgun, bullets for Grace, and then with Leon, I mean, they just shower you with ammo anyway, so that didn't really matter. I'm sure when I replay it, and I'll replay it on, like, the survival difficulty, it'll probably force me to engage with some of those mechanics, but played the game on, like, the normal default difficulty, and I mean, I died a fair few times, like, way more than Village. I think I died once properly in Village on my first playthrough. That game is so easy, it's actually pitiful. So I actually did die a fair few times in this game because it's a little more intense on the action. So I felt like the difficulty was fairly well balanced, but I didn't feel the need to get too involved with the crafting system. Really, I just used whatever I could get. I didn't really go out of my way to craft any, better bullets or any, other bits and pieces that you might be able to do. I don't know. I didn't use Molotovs, like, at all throughout the entire game, and I didn't have a problem with that. There's just a lot of stuff that I just ended up not using, and I don't know whether that's just because I'm so used to these games at this point that, maybe I'm just better at getting around situations. I don't want to give myself that much credit. I would much rather assume that the game is maybe just slightly unbalanced in that region. But in talking about how, the first half of the game is better than the second, I would say maybe not halves, but the last third of this game kind of, I want to say it sucked. I want to say it was bad. You do the whole typical Resident Evil thing of going into an underground lab, and then you get thrown a bunch of classic enemies at you that, as soon as the lickers showed up, it was an immediate moment of like, oh no, not these guys. And then it was a wave of relief, because I was like, oh, but I know how to deal with these guys. And then they pose no threat throughout the rest of the game. And, those are the last few sections of the game. The final section as Grace that you play as is really bad. Like, it's not fun. You're just crouching around these lickers, and you're just, avoiding them. They can't see you. That's their whole gimmick. So you're just crouching around them. You're just waiting for them to, get out of your way so you can just walk over there. And the game gives you items to dispatch them instantly. They're just on the table. Like, here's an acid vial. Throw it at the licker and it will die. Great. I just killed all of them, and then I just moved on. They posed no threat. And at the end of the game, you would feel like maybe stakes should have risen, The beginning of the game as Grace was way harder. Same thing for Leon. They put you in a room with, like, genuinely, like, almost like a dozen lickers at one point, a small room, and it just becomes a bit of a clusterfuck. And I just threw a bunch of grenades, and then they just all hell ensued, and then they all died. And it posed no challenge or threat. It just felt like a bit of a mess from a design point of view. And then you get to the final boss, and it just lays down and dies. It's nothing that you haven't seen before. This game works best when it is just one new kind of set piece after another, and it's throwing stuff at you. The spider boss battle near the middle was really cool because I wasn't expecting it, and then it happens, and it's this whole boss fight. I actually found it quite challenging as well, which was nice, and it was way better than any of the later boss fights. I don't think there's anything that comes close to that. There's a moment with a big plant, and again it's just shoot the weak points, and the game starts to kind of lag a bit when it gets nearer the end. Is nostalgia a good excuse for just doing the same thing over and over again? I don't think so. All of the Grace sections were good, aside from the final, like, lab stuff, which I already said. And all of the Leon sections were fun up until, again, the lab stuff, the later stuff. I don't really know how I feel about returning to the RPD. It doesn't feel nostalgic enough because it's like we've literally been here. Less than like 10 years ago we were playing the RE2 remake, and you return to it in the RE3 remake as well. Just exploring the same location. I got a little bit of joy seeing Mr. X again. That was kind of fun, but they don't really do much with him. You just have like a boss fight with him and run away from him, and that's about it. There's no like moment where he's like actually stalking you like in Resident Evil 2, which is a shame because that was obviously his most unique trait. Ultimately, it just seems emblematic of where the Resident Evil franchise is going at the moment, which is that it just wants to cuddle back into its safe, familiar home, although you still have a lot of that good, unique stuff, and all the best stuff in this game was all the stuff that was new. The zombies in the first half having their own personalities, having memories of their previous selves and like saying things, and that one zombie that goes around turning all the lights off, and then the singing zombie who's like an opera singer or whatever, like that stuff's really cool and genuinely unnerving. But then that all disappears at the second half of the game and the zombies just become generic zombies again. The stalker enemy for Grace is also really great. That whole basement section was like probably the scariest Resident Evil stuff that I've played since my first playthrough of 7. Really good stuff, really unnerving, very creepy design. And then as soon as she goes away, Grace's sections just have nothing really to do. I mean, you don't play as her that much after that point anyway, which is a shame. And in the second half of the game, they introduce a secondary villain who shows up, is obviously kind of supposed to be like a bit of a Wesker light kind of guy, does basically nothing, dies, and then, you know, that's it.
So, the prodigal daughter returns.
They're just throwing ideas at you like crazy, and so a lot of them don't stick. There's a lot of good stuff in the game. There's also a lot of stuff that just seems emblematic of Resident Evil, and frankly, you know, all the best stuff in this game is the original stuff, and all the stuff that is not as good in this game, although still, you know, surface level enjoyable. You know, I never hated any moment from this game like I did with Village, is just the same old kind of stuff. It's just going through the motions again. So that does kind of leave me in a bit of a worried state for Resident Evil 10. They tease Chris Redfield coming back and stuff, and you're just like, no, enough of this. Grace is the best character that the Resident Evil franchise has thrown at us in a long, long time. Ethan Winters was boring and seemed like he had suffered severe brain damage because he never reacted to anything in a way that a real human being would. For all this talk of him being like, you know, an everyman, he really wasn't. He was just a blank slate. Grace is great though. I love Grace, but she's in this game having to share screen time with Leon and having to share screen time with a bunch of nonsensical, kind of typical Resident Evil-y stuff. Just feels like Resident Evil doing the same shtick again. The reason why Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 are so good and they are so beloved by many is because they were unique. You know, Resident Evil 4 was unique. Resident Evil 7 was unique. This is not unique. The dueling gameplay stuff is unique, and I hope that they keep that going forward, because it's the only way in which we will get like another survival horror-y Resident Evil game, is if it has to be paired with the Resident Evil 4 action. Then I would rather have that than just have the games go down the typical, you know, Resident Evil 4 action route. But I'm a bit scared that they are just going to chuck it all in the bin and just go, people want Resident Evil 4, let's just keep giving them Resident Evil 4 because that's apparently the only thing that we can do, or it's the only thing that interests us anymore. Do I sound like I'm being overly negative? Possibly, yeah, because again, I would like to say that I did like it, you know, throughout. I did enjoy it. Better than Village. It's a hell of a lot better than Village. It's better than the Resident Evil 4 remake because it at least tries to do something different, instead of just being a watered down version of a game that came out 20 years ago. I just don't feel like praising it too much because it basically just does a lot of the same shtick that Resident Evil has been doing for ages now, and you could say it's fine because this is an anniversary game, I suppose, so the nostalgia and the kind of the reintroduction of a lot of the same kind of elements, plot elements and locations, is because it's the 30th anniversary. But the thing is, you know, the Resident Evil franchise has always been like this, really. Like, I would rather praise a game in the Resident Evil franchise that comes along and really does something different, rather than wallowing in the same paddling pool that it's been playing in for the last 15 or so years. It's a recency bias as well. Like, I guarantee in a couple months, you'll have videos and you'll have people saying, actually, Resident Evil 9 was not as good as you thought it was, and you'll have people applying a more sober, objective view to this game and saying, yeah, maybe the third act was a bit terrible, Maybe the nostalgia bait didn't really work and was kind of misguided, and maybe this dueling, indecisive nature of the game might actually be a bit of a bad sign for the future of the series and not a good one. Ultimately, I liked it more than I thought I would when they announced that Leon was going to be a part of it. I like it probably less than I thought I would like it when the initial announcement trailers came out, and I thought that it was going to be just a purely, survival horror video game with a brand new protagonist. We're going to have to see where it goes. We're going to have to see what Resident Evil 10 wants to do, but I'm getting bad feelings. I'm getting a feeling that they're going to redo Resident Evil 6, and it's going to be all the characters from the continuity coming back and having to fight some sort of world-ending apocalyptic threat, and it's going to have very little in the way of, actual good survival horror stuff, and it's going to be mostly just hitting people with chainsaws. And there may be some fun with that, and, gameplay-wise, this game was very fun and managed to pull all that off, so I just worry that Resident Evil is getting a bit too comfortable remaking Resident Evil 4 over and over and over again. That's kind of my review. I don't know if there's anything else I really want to say at this point. It was fun. I enjoyed it. But I have my reservations, and I have concerns going forward. Leon S. Kennedy. And all those things. I don't know. That's it.